Join us at Your Own University. Like, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. You're not going to want to miss a bit of this.
All right, podcast number 4. Today we're going to discuss hot and cold states. Before we do, I'll just mention that in general, and in part by design, these podcasts are relatively spontaneous. I like to do some cursory research sometimes when I'm able to myself beforehand, but I don't necessarily set out a plan like I did the first time talking about it. So they're generally rather spontaneous. I did look at something about hot and cold states. I just looked it up today on Google. I only went to the first page. I think that doesn't do the possibilities justice, but I found mostly scientific responses, so very scientific, and generally scientific definitions. And I found a site which I like, looks cool. I think the site itself is even called Behavioral Economics. So that'll be something I'll be probably wanting to ask you about, Lisha. But the way I'm seeing today is I'm guessing really, and we'll see what happens, is my asking Lisha a bunch of questions that she can answer with her psychological background so I can get some answers to quell some of my curiosity here. But
I may or may not have answers.
Exactly.
Because I haven't been to that website.
Oh yeah, no worries. Well, this is the field. And just like you were saying last time in the previous podcast, there are different, well, for lack of a better, more accurate term, states. Like, I don't know what I don't know. I know what I know. I don't know what and all of that, which maybe you can touch back on. But I'll just start with my little bit, which is, to me, hot and cold states, however much we understand them or not, or however much I understand them or not, scientifically, on which I place value. Obviously, to me, in my life, they make a big difference. And I've made a central part of my life trying to feel as good as I can, being in the best state. A lot of that having to do with health and, how much sleep I get, things like that, so that I don't find myself in what I think qualifies as a hot state. I don't want to be super cold, all the time, but I want to have perspective on what I'm doing and feel right about it. And often making decisions when I'm wound up or in a bad mood or hungry or anything like that are things that I don't really condone myself when I take a step back and look at how I want to live my life. So last thing I'll say before, for now is, shall I read, Lisha, like one of these definitions I found about hot state? It's kind of interesting. And then
yeah, sure.
I can ask you questions. Okay, cool. So I'm scrolling to my other screen here. And here is, so first of all, just the general Google, the first thing that always comes up on the page, which comes from the Decision Lab, says that hot visceral states are when our mental state is influenced by hunger, sexual desire, fear, exhaustion, or other strong emotions. A cold mental state is one that is not being influenced by emotion and is usually more rational and logical. And now I'm going to take this a step further to this site I found, which is behavioraleconomics.com. Looks pretty serious, so to speak. So at a glance, I would tend to trust this, but I think you should always cross-check. In any case, there's an interesting experiment they did, which kind of shows this. So I know I've still kept the floor, Alicia, but if you can bear with me for 2 more paragraphs, are you up for that? Then I'll just read them and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. All right, so there's something called the hot-cold empathy gap, which really intrigues me. So because empathy to me is super important. If you don't have empathy, there's no co-creation, I would think. In any case, maybe something else to come back to. This is what behavioraleconomics.com says about hot-cold empathy gap. It is difficult for humans to predict how they will behave in the future. A hot-cold empathy gap occurs when people underestimate the influence of visceral states, e.g. being angry, in pain, or hungry, on their behavior or preferences, which comes from research from Lowenstein 2005. In medical decision-making, for example, a hot to cold empathy gap may lead to undesirable treatment choices when cancer patients are asked to choose between treatment options right after being told about their diagnosis, which makes sense, right? If someone tells you you have bad news and then they ask you like right there on the spot, what's your plan? maybe not the best time to answer that. The
Yeah.
second paragraph is, in a study on the reverse, a cold to hot empathy gap, smokers were assigned to different experimental conditions. This was based on research from Sayet and a group around 2008. Some smokers in a hot craving state were asked to make predictions about a high craving state in a second session. Others made the same prediction while they were in a cold state. In contrast to those in the hot group, smokers in the cold group under-predicted how much they would value smoking during the second session. This empathy gap can explain poor decisions among smokers attempting to quit that place, them in high-risk situations, like socializing over a drink, and why people underestimate the risk of becoming addicted in the first place. So I just thought it was good to have that solid and pre-researched example to start us off.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
No worries.
We
Does
would
any
love to know what you guys think. So
Yeah.
make comments, let us know what you guys think if you're listening here. Or
Good
if you've
point.
been in those states, we want to know. So we can talk on it more if this is something that interests you too. Because I think it's always good to explore how we feel. And even though they're talking about hot and cold as a mindset, right? I personally think that there's a lot of space where it becomes a psychological mindset and hot and cold and trying to act a certain way and try to be a certain way, which can be like an imposter syndrome or fake it till you make it. And lack of being comfortable with those uncomfortable emotions and or accepting or recognizing even our uncomfortable emotions. So the hot and cold to me is more of an emotionality that then, yes, gets in the way of clear thinking.
Interesting. So it sounds to me like there may be two things we're talking about here. One is, on the one hand, there's a difference and also a capacity or possibility for people to be swayed toward a hot or cold state by their environment, their like external surroundings, kind of what I was saying, like hunger or whatnot, or this case of the smokers, cold or hot state. But that it's also possible to be in hot and cold states, I think is what you're saying, and I'm kind of asking, in an internal way where it's like you want to be perceived a certain way by someone, and so you are putting yourself in a sort of state where you're not necessarily like holding your deepest truth. Or am I getting what you're saying right?
Like people pleasing, right? You can be in a hot state, right. You're in a place where you're like, I don't agree with this person, or I feel attacked by this person. It creates a hot state in your body, but you deny it. Then that's, it's been linked to cancer. Back to that cancer diagnosis. So is that people pleasing? It's still external. I think it's still all triggers by the external. But it's that internal feeling that we have less control over because it's not taught. We're taught more in society about being kind and or any like dealing with external things, interacting with each other, and social expectations and cultural expectations and religious expectations and trying to fit into that, which all can trigger, right, a hot or cold state.
Interesting.
But that hot and cold state within myself anyway, and definitely what I see in my clients is this rush of emotion that comes up and puts the brain in fight, flight, or freeze.
Which relates to the amygdala, right? The certain part of your reptilian brain, which I just read actually which
puts you in survival. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And once you're in survival, it's pretty much like you kind of lose control. No matter how much control you have, you kind of lose control, especially in that hot state. But the cold state too, when you just want to go to bed, you feel completely drained. You're like, screw it, right? That's also
hot state.
Hot, avoidance.
So, okay, cool. So a couple of interesting things again here for me. First, it sounds like, well, first of all, you mentioned mindset, which I just want to point to and highlight is one of the aspects or categories we use at Huron University, which to me are close to my heart really intuitively. And this is actually where Lisha and I overlapped. Like this just made sense to me for whatever reason. And she was already using these quite prolifically, quite comprehensively, these categories. And I just heard you mention one of them, mindset. So I just wanted to highlight that. The other really interesting thing, and you have experience with this as well, so that gives it even more gravity and substance for me. It seems like you were saying that if you don't, in a way, it sounds like you were saying, if you don't hold to your truth, I'm definitely paraphrasing, but if you don't hold to your truth, that you can become ill. So like something in your mind, a belief or whatever, can actually make you ill. And this is pretty age old, and many of you have probably heard of this, but totally worth talking about, I think. So yeah. What do you think? Like, what comes to mind?
I think that we could definitely do a whole episode on that.
Yeah.
Okay. But these states, I mean, either hot or cold, I think the main thing between them both is that we kind of go out of our head, out of logic. We have a foggy brain, and then we're in reactivity. And I think the first thing to notice about any of that is it's normal. And nobody's going to have it just never happen. So as long as we're making hot or cold states wrong, then really there's no winning. How do we work within the hot and cold states in a healthy way? That's where we can retrain our brain and retrain our responses and have better communication. So you and I have been in a couple hot states, especially when you're here in the
just
house.
A couple.
And,
just a couple.
And you know, I think that what was really great about that, even though we're in that one, we stated it's a hot space, right? Like, I'm feeling this hot space, and the beauty of it is we each got to own it. Like, am I in a hot space or am I not in a hot space, right? And then, because I know there was at least one time where you felt like you were in a hot space, you felt I was in a hot space, but I didn't feel I was in that hot space, right? So if I was a people pleaser still, which I'm recovering, so I have to catch myself, but if I was a people pleaser, I maybe would have been like, oh, I'm in a hot state. Okay. And tried to fix that, instead of being like, no, I'm not in a hot state. I'm in this state. I'm in a get things done critical state. And you needed me to find a different tone and expression to help you out of your hot state. So I could do that in that state, because I wasn't offended. Now, there was other times where I was in a hot state and I just had to admit, yeah, I am. Like, I want to punch your lights out right now.
So what's the difference between being revved up or having an intensity and being in a hot state?
I think the lack of clarity in the brain. I think it's that amygdala takes over, that reptilian brain, that survival brain takes over when we're in a hot state. And kind of all bets are off. That's when you say something to your spouse or your loved one. It's usually the people closest to us that we can get hot with. We have no, it's easier to get that filter, right? And well, here's an example of a hot state. I got one this morning. So last night when I left the home, I was like, have the kitchen cleaned, right? When I come home in the morning, I want the kitchen cleaned. And because we were transporting puppies last night. And I got home this morning and the kitchen wasn't clean. Everyone's asleep. The lights were on. Okay. The movie room was completely trashed. My bathroom was used and trashed, right? And hadn't been for a while. And
I've seen some of these things. That's part of why I was laughing there.
Yeah.
Just audience.
Yeah.
Especially the kitchen's not cleaned and all the lights are on at 4 a.m. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is that, like, so each event got me a little bit hotter. So the first event, I was like, okay, how am I going to handle this situation? I'm still rationally thinking. I text my kids, right? They're asleep. I text them all this nice little letter. Then I pick up the bathroom. I was like, okay, whatever. Then I walk in and I see the other ask that I had, pick up after yourself in the movie room, didn't happen either. At that point, it was just enough that I screamed no, which is a no practice, which is a practice of mine that I teach to my clients, so it is healthy. Like I screamed no and woke the entire house up and made everybody clean. But that no, that initial reaction, like wasn't me thinking rationally. That no, scream bloody murder in the house, right? Wasn't directed at anyone, so it didn't cause any harm. Like an insult would or something else, right? I didn't trigger anybody else in the house besides waking them up. But I definitely lost my top. I don't know.
All right. So you're differentiating. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So I think, so there's a difference between, in a way, it sounds to me like actually you might put something in like in a broader, usage of hot cold state. You could say it's on a spectrum in a way. So there's the point when someone's what I'm calling maybe a little revved up or a little on the intense side, but they're not completely in a hot state where they can't have any control or command of or view or
still
perspective
check in
on
and be
or
like,
of what
what
they're
am
doing.
I feeling?
Yeah.
Sorry to speak over you.
Yeah.
But there's that check-in. For me, like
Yeah.
I have PTSD, right? That wasn't a PTSD thing, but it does give me a great insight into when my amygdala takes over and I'm like, I'm acting like a 4-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 16-year-old. It's usually my 3 stages I've come clear to know. And after the fact, I can step back and be like, okay, what trauma age like was reacting to this situation, right? What am I feeling? Of being wrong, right? Or being told how I am. Like those are 2 triggers for me. So understanding your triggers is going to be huge. But if
Which takes work though, right? Just to point out, like
yeah,
years. No?
no, it doesn't have to take years if you know the right questions to ask yourself and kind of analyze your life, but it can take years. It can take decades, right?
So it definitely takes profound thinking or internal observation.
Internal observation
Yeah.
and life review, right? For me to understand, well, that trauma happened then. These are the times in my life I normally react that way. But when I do react from that place, it is not rational, right? You can't tell me to calm down because I'm unable to, right? You can't
Yeah.
tell me to get up because I'm not able to. When my clients that have bipolar, the same thing. There's just like this break. People that have major depression can't get out of bed. So those things that we think are so easily just thought about, right, and rationalized, and like cognitive behavioral therapy, right, just shift of a little behavior, no longer it's no longer a thing when somebody gets to that hot state. I don't believe, like a true hot state. That's when breath techniques and recognizing your own internal self as a witness that, oh, I'm in a hot state. Okay, well, I'm freaking out right now. It has nothing to do with these people around me. Or maybe it does completely. Taking yourself out of that situation, calming down, and then you can, when you think rationally, you can say, well, what do I want instead? And do I want closeness in this relationship? Right. So for us, you and I, like our main thing is like, well, we want to be on this project. We want to work together. We have been friends for 20 years. Like how can we have all of this and recognize our differences and really embrace them? Because that's what this is all about, is your uniqueness and my uniqueness, not us becoming the same.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things, but I will say that I'll just point out a couple of things that I think you mentioned, and I'll cross over into the like yoga territory a little bit. It sounds like part of what helps one manage a hot cold state is what happens before that over time. Like you mentioned self-study, which for yoga buffs is svadhyaya. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but it's something like that, self-study. And yeah, you work on yourself over time. You get to know yourself better, and then when a hot state comes up, you're more familiar perhaps with what's going on, and there, even just by that fact that you're a little more familiar with it, that immediately gives you command of the situation a little more, or at least enough to know that you just need a moment or need to come back to whatever it is that's the hot state that's revved up at the time, you know?
Yeah. So the things that I would say for people, especially for the hot state, I don't know too much. I think it would work the same for the cold state. Is one, like, understand what makes you hot or what makes you cold. And then just accept it. Like, we often try to fix it, change it, move it, shift it, and that takes the tremendous work. The fast path is to simply accept it. Yep, that happened to me. Or when she does this, I feel like this. When he does that, I feel like that. When, you know, my boss says I have to stay late, right, and I have things happening at home, I feel like I have to. I don't know how to say no. Just kind of looking at things like that, and to know what your triggers are that put you in those states. Two is understand how you react personally to those states. And you most likely have a hot reaction and a cold reaction. And I feel like, from what I understand and what I experience myself, is like, it is a visceral feeling, like a rising of energy in my body. And so if I can catch that energy, you know, at my guts or my solar plexus before it gets to my head, then I still have some rational thinking to put in some of those coping mechanisms that we read about and learn about and study about, whether it's yogic breathing or taking a break or going for a workout or a walk, eating, right? Sleeping, sex, all of the cures. Oh, I'm hangry. Okay, I need to go do this before I have this heated discussion with this person that gets on my nerves, or before, you know, so you know that you're taken care of.
Yeah, got it.
Because once you're in it,
Absolutely.
you
So
can't think.
exactly. And what you said, visceral, actually, I do remember seeing in multiple of these definitions that I was looking up online. It's a visceral state. And on the contrary, perhaps to just touch a little bit into what I might have said before when I mentioned this Combridge thing, is from a yogic vantage point, these 5 categories often split. So you might just look at these as categories, like you could categorize them this way or that way, but often the mental state in the study, in my views of it, my learning of it, is 2-parted. So that part of it is the intellectual mind, which is, I'll just venture forth to say, it's a little more involved and less, you have less perspective. Whereas there's the observational mind, which I think is what you call the witness, that is the one that sees. So in a way itself, that aspect of mind is in fact a cool state, like that you have with you, at least as a potential at all times, which is, to me, kind of a cool thought. Because if you want things to be as optimal as possible, happy, warm, a better world, whatever it is, it's great to know that you have this part of you, whether or not it's working, however well it's working at the time or not, this capacity of a cool state within, you know, as a potential, always within a hot state, because it's all you. There you are. So you're in a hot state, but there's still the observational mind potentially available. And the more svadvaya, or self-study, you do through time, which includes observation at the moment, but it also, self-study definitely, you know, refers to, like you were saying, like, well, I thought about what was happening in my life then. And, you know, this is like academic study is involved as well. The more of that happens, that's the better and better situation you're in to have the situation you want, ideally a harmonious, positive situation.
And to learn how to talk through that. And we had our nonviolent communication, we had our visceral explanation, like, I'm feeling it in my heart, I'm feeling it in my gut, right? When you speak to me like that way, I feel it, I feel attacked. I feel your energy and it's just too big. Can you hold it back? And if both parties, right, has that awareness that we are our energy, we can call our energy back closer to our body, instead of like the explosion that often happens when we're in that hot state that puts other people at the defensive. And
where you're reacting about what you're feeling, as opposed to simply sitting within the feeling and being able to then be in that observate or cooler aspect of the state, if I were to use the spectrum idea I brought in, and then you're able to communicate. And then what words you choose, like you're saying, are important, and that's its own science as well. NLP, for example, I know you've mentioned. Is there like one statement you can think of you might want to give to the audience?
I love nonviolent communication when it comes to hot and cold states. The studies and research around it is really great. You don't have to do anything really. It works even when you don't have that cognitive space in your head, where NLP more, you need that visualization. You need to be able to choose your words, right? But if you're not thinking, you're not choosing your words.
Yeah, right.
So I love the nonviolent communication formula, which is basically when you do X, I feel X, and I take it even further with my clients. Instead of I feel X, like I feel upset, or I feel this, I feel it in my heart. I take it to that visceral space. I learned it from one of my coaches, Kristen Sweeney Morelli, and it just changes things, because nobody can argue with me about if I feel it in my heart, if I like my shoulders hurt when you tell me that, or my knees hurt when you tell me that. It doesn't matter where you feel it. But it's me owning it, right? And it's me witnessing it. And then instead of, or next time, could you blah, 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 speak in a nicer tone, right? Don't be so sharp with your words, or can you do this? And it's a request for you, right? It's how to help you in that situation. So it's still not about them. That's what I love about nonviolent communication. So to help me with my sore heart, can you XYZ next time? And then you check in with them. What did you hear me say? And sometimes they'll come back with, well, I heard you say that the sky is blue and zebras were falling. And you're like, no, I just talked about my heart, right?
Yeah.
And so then you just repeat it again until you understand one another, instead of trying to explain it 16 different ways, which is men and women especially, or masculine and feminine. Like we do that, which just really...
Which will be next podcast, FYI.
Yeah, cool. Which
Yeah.
just confuses the matter for most of us. If you try to explain it a different way, we can't hear it the first way. How can we hear it the second one?
Maybe it's analogous to like if you don't speak a language, the idea that you just yell and then they'll be able to understand, which is kind of it's an old reputation some cultures have, including our own.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's not that effective. I was thinking,
right, exactly.
Like I yelled this morning, but I didn't really yell anything. I just yelled, ah!
Right. I don't necessarily consider that as what I'm talking about. So you're safe
right.
there,
So I like
yeah.
yelling profanities, or yelling like, you did this to me, or you did that to me, or you, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, this morning when you're yelling, you were just as if you were like falling off a cliff. It was literally, you were just walking to situation. You weren't in a relational exchange. No, you were just, you happened upon phenomenon that rocked your world.
It did. But in that sense, like when we get into that screaming match, it doesn't work. I was thinking in the car the other day, like, wow, I grew up around all this screaming and yelling and communicating, and we just yelled at each other. And I was looking at my reactivity to events that had happened in my life, the website going down. I had a response that was like, whoa, for my Unstoppable Confidence event. It was just mean. And another thing, and I was like, oh, I whisper now. And my kids are terrified of the whisper. They know that if the whisper comes, like, it's like, that's when things are bad. If mom's yelling, it's good. If mom's like, okay, now go clean the kitchen right now. They're like, why are you whispering?
Yeah, no, it might be akin to sometimes when I'm feeling a lot, like, and I can just think of instances where it is relational. Someone will say something to me that gets me in some way. I will have trouble speaking because I'll be almost shaking with the amount of intensity or heat, for me, usually, I'm feeling internally. So I don't know if that's the same, but that's what I think of when you say the whispering is like when I can barely speak,
Yeah, it's like, okay, instead of going out, now I go in. And I think part of that is because of that massive visceral feeling. I'm no longer scared of it. I used to be scared of my own feeling, right? It was too overwhelming. Like I just wanted the feeling to go away. Now I'm like, whoa, interesting. Here it is. And I know that difference for when I do communicate. So what's our next podcast? Because I know we're running
Well, the
late.
next podcast, if I'm remembering correctly, is masculine feminine. And that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this will be perfect because we're talking about communication styles. I
Well,
would think,
exactly. A bit by design, we'll say. Yeah.
yeah, I think that the hot and the cold directly relate. And I hope that you guys all enjoyed this little hot and cold discussion.
Absolutely. And if you want to know more, come back to the site, talk to us, whatnot. I mean, everything we're talking about, what we're highlighting, the questions I'm asking all relate to what your own university is about. And one thing I wanted to mention before we go is this idea, we just dropped little parts of this in, but everyone is their own university. So it's your own university with infinite number of universities within that, which we should have as a podcast at some point. So
For
you
sure.
really are what's important. I mean, it is you and your world. Just
Yeah.
join us. Let's overlap. Let's check it out. Let's investigate. It's all helpful for each
Align
other.
and see where we're completely different and where we can learn and grow with each other. Like that's
However we want to. Well, hopefully in a positive way. Absolutely. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So join us next time. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here at Your Own University and join us on Facebook at Your Own University Events or Your Own University page. And of course, check us out at yourownuniversity.com. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.